Today I want to show you how to put a facing on your quilts rather than a binding. So let's check out what the difference is. If you haven't already subscribed to Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel, make sure you do that and be sure to click on the bell below so you'll get a notification the next time we release a new video. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson Hurst from Chatterbox Quilts, and I wanted to show you the difference between binding a quilt and facing a quilt and explain how you can actually face your own quilts. So typically when you finish off the edges of your quilt, the final step is to put a binding on. So that covers the raw edge between the front of the quilt and the back. So most of the time the binding is a different color than the last border leading up to it or the fabric leading up to it. Not always, but a lot of times it is. You have a choice. But in any case, it forms a frame around the quilt. Now, maybe you don't want that. Maybe you just want the quilt to be the way it is before you add the binding on. So let me show you examples of that. In this particular table runner, and this is made up from designs by Kay McKenzie, I didn't want to add anything else on the edge. I have these cornerstones here, and I've got other fabric for the border, so I wasn't sure what I was going to choose for the binding. So a facing would be perfect for this kind of project. And so that's what I added on the back. So we have a different fabric here, and you'll notice it does not show on the front. So you can use any fabric you want for these facing strips. It doesn't have to match the quilt any way at all. So if you have leftover binding strips, because the facing strips are 2.5 inches as well, that can work really well to add to a quilt that you want to put a facing on. There's also these little corner squares. They're folded in half to make triangles. You sometimes see them a little bit, and I have chosen the same fabric as the corner squares here just coincidentally. But you just put those on and they're going to hold the facing towards the back of the quilt. Now you'll notice in this particular example that I have hand stitched those facing strips down, but you don't necessarily have to. Let's take a look at another example. Now here is one that's also faced, this little wall hanging. But I haven't stitched down the facing strips yet, so you can see they stick out a bit. Okay, so eventually you're going to have to sew them down, but you don't have to really worry. They're all finished, the edges, so they're not going to fray or anything if you have them somewhere, you know, lying around or with other quilts before you hand stitch them down. But that's what they're going to look like. So when you're to the stage where you finished all machine stitching, that's what you're going to be faced with to stitch down. And at least you don't have quite as much stitching to do with the binding because you have those corner little triangles and you're not going to be stitching them down. And you know why you don't want to stitch them down? Because they make really easy and quick little hangers, right? You don't have to add a hanging tab or a hanging sleeve on or anything because you've got these little guys. So you can just use a dowel or stick, whatever you want to use, and put them in there and hang it up on the wall. So it's kind of like a two for this one. So you get the quilt edges all finished and you also get little hanging tabs or little corner tabs to use to hang your quilt. Okay, so you probably want to know how to do that. So let me show you what you need to do to face a quilt. Here's what you're going to need to put a facing on your quilt. First, of course, your quilt, and I'm just using a little mug rug here to show you, but it's the same technique no matter what size your quilt is. You also need to have some facing strips, or you might call them binding strips. So if you have leftover binding, that's perfect for these projects. If you don't, you just need to cut 2.5 inch strips, fold them in half and press them. So prepare them the same way as you would a binding. Remember, the facing strips don't have to match the fabric on the front. They don't even have to be all the same fabrics on the back. So you could have 4 different fabrics on your facing strips. Okay, next thing you're going to need is you need 4 of these squares. Now, these particular ones are 3 inches. For a larger quilt, I'd use probably a 4 or 5 inch square. And what you're going to do with those is you're going to fold them in half and press them. And so they're all going to look like this. Let me move this guy out of the way so you can see them better. So you're going to have 4 of these folded in half, and those are going to go in the corners of your quilt. Scissors or rotary cutter. Scissors are probably good for this project actually. And then we're going to be pushing out corners. So whatever your favorite tool is to use to do that, I like to use that purple thing, which is what I have here. I'll put a link in the description below so you can see more about that. You're also going to need your iron, of course, as we always do, and your sewing machine. All right, so the first thing you need to do when you're working on this project is to prepare your little squares. So I've got 3 of them ready, and I just need to press this little guy. So I'm just going to fold him over here and give him a quick little press to hold him down. Okay, and those are going to go in the corners, like I mentioned. Now these happen to match not too badly. They don't necessarily have to. They may show a little bit on the front, so keep that in mind. You may want to have these all the same fabric. And they're going to go in the corners like this. Okay, that's pretty basic, right? Oh, it looks kind of nice like that, doesn't it? It kind of frames it. They're not going to stay there. They're going to be flipped to the back eventually. Okay, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your facing strips or binding strips, and you want to, looking to see if I have a straight edge here. Here I have a straight edge, but I still have selvage, so I have to cut that off. So let me just cut that off. Straight-ish edge. And that's going to go over top here. Now these facing strips should be about 2 inches, approximately 2 inches shorter than the length that side of the quilt you're putting it on. So the length of the binding strip or facing strip should be about 2 inches less than the length that of that side of the quilt you're putting it on. Okay, what you want to make sure is that they're going to come into and cover part of those little corner triangles. Okay, now you can either cut your strips if you want right from the start, or if you want to, you can just start stitching, and when you get closer to that edge, like maybe about here for example, just cut the strip off. Your choice. It doesn't really matter. Both ways work well. And then what you need to do is to start sewing things down. So if you want to, you can certainly pin this all together so it holds it in place, and then you go to the sewing machine. So the next thing you're going to do at the machine is you're going to start stitching right from the corner, because you want to secure that little corner triangle down, and you're going to take a 1/4 inch seam all the way across. Of course, you'll be cutting this off like I mentioned. Let's just do that right now for this guy. Usually I cut as I go, but for the first one, we'll just do this. And you're going to stitch all the way across. Then you're going to take your next facing strip, you're going to put it on here, you're going to start stitching from the corner and go all the way down. So the same process for all 4 sides. So let's go to the sewing machine and see how that's done. So I'm going to stitch this down with the 1/4 inch seam, starting right from the corner like you normally would. Take out my pin as I get closer to the corner. I don't want to stitch over that. All right, so there's my first side sewn on. So now what I need to do is I need to take my facing strip, a long one that I have here, and I need to start stitching with this one down the side. So I like to kind of butt these up against each other so they meet there. And then I'm going to be stitching down, and again I can cut this off in advance if I'd like to. Make sure it's going to be long enough to cover part of that corner triangle there. So you want to make sure it comes up and covers part of it. And so we're just going to continue doing the same thing, starting from the corner and stitching down. Sometimes I have to adjust these just a little bit at the corners, coming towards the corners. Okay, and I'm just going to finish the other 2 sides the same way. So that's what my facings should look like after they're all stitched on. Let me trim up some threads here. And the next thing we want to do is we want to reinforce these corners. So we want to go back to where these 2 lines intersected, and we want to stitch on a diagonal across them just a couple times back and forth just to reinforce them. Okay, so they should look like this. So I'm going to do that for the other 3 corners as well. Okay, so all the corners have now been reinforced with the diagonal stitching. And now that's all we're going to do at the machine right now. We're going to go back to the cutting table, and I'll show you what the next step is. Now it's time to do some pressing, because those facing strips are facing towards the center, and we want them facing out towards the raw edges, because eventually they're going to go right around to the back of the quilt. So what you need to do is get your iron heated up, get on some steam, and start pressing those out towards the outside raw edges. All right, so your quilt should now look like this. The next thing we need to do is go back to the sewing machine And we're going to do a little bit of top stitching or edge stitching. This will help the facings to roll towards the back of the quilt. So you're just going to stitch about a quarter inch, about a scant quarter inch in from that seam on all the facing strips. So let's go to the machine and do that now. So now we're going to stitch this scant quarter inch seam in from this seam that we had just done with the facing. So we're going to do that on all 4 sides. Okay, so all of them now have this line of stitching on them, and that's just going to help them roll to the back. So the next thing we need to do is go back to the cutting table where we're going to actually do some pressing. So I'm back at the cutting table where I'm going to do some pressing, but I actually do have a little bit of cutting to do before we get to the pressing. So there's an awful lot of bulk that's going to be in these corners here because we're going to actually flip those little fabric triangles, the ones that used to be squares. They're going to get flipped to the back, so it's going to be an awful lot of fabric back there. So if we can trim off some of that fabric, that would be really good. So what I want to do is take my scissors and I want to trim on an angle sort of from the edge of my facing strip and down towards the corner here. We want to make sure we don't cut through that junction of the 2 stitches, but just a little bit will help. Whatever you can get off is always helpful. So you're just going to cut them sort of like that, so they don't look very neat and tidy, but they will be helpful. So I'm going to do that on both sides. It's just easier to kind of rotate them around one angle and then go back and do the other angle. You can even feel all that thickness just with what's there now. Okay, and now I'm going to go back and do the other ones. I'm going to flip this over maybe. So you want to fire up your iron again, get the steam going, and this is going to take, well, not a lot of time, but a little bit more time, because what you're doing now is you're rolling this facing towards the back of the quilt. Remember we talked before about wanting to have the facing all in the back, and if a little bit of the front goes to the back, that's okay. That's the stage we're at now. Okay, so you can, when you're doing this, you can use your facing strips to gently kind of pull it towards the back, and then you're going to use your iron, and watch out for the steam, and we're going to be pressing it. So it may take a little bit longer to press these than it normally would, just to get them under control and behaving, because you see they want to come back towards the front. So I'm going to do this for all 4 sides, and then I'll show you what's next after that. So this is what it looks like when you press it. Okay, not too impressive, I know. Impressive, get it? Pressing, impressive? Okay. Anyway, but it's been managed better. They're never going to lie completely flat. There's an awful lot of fabric that you're actually trying to get towards the back of the quilt. But when you flip it around to the front, they'll kind of lie down for you, and you can get an idea of what your little quilt is going to look like, or mug rug in this case. Oops, that doesn't look quite right. What are those doing there? Okay, they're not going to stay on the front either. So the next thing that you're going to do is flip those little corners over to the back. And that will help keep those facings down a little bit better. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like now. And when you flip it over, it's a little bit better. You're going to do some pressing and stuff. And you're going to have to push those corners out. So get your favorite tool for pushing the corners out. I like to use that purple thing. And again, you're dealing with an awful lot of fabric in there. So sometimes it's even helpful if you have hemostats to pull the fabric out. You're working from the outside, pulling the inside fabric out at that stage if you're using them. Again, you're working through a lot of fabric here. There we go. That's better. Okay, so looks so cool. It looks like there should be a picture in the middle there, doesn't it? There's a little picture frame. All right, so that's what it's doing. There's your front. It's looking pretty nice, eh? All finished off. And then there's one more step to do, and that is to hand sew the facing strips down. So just like you have to do with your binding, you're going to go along and stitch them all down. If you want to, you can move your little corners back out, stitch it down, move them back again, like you could have stitched them down first, but I wanted to show you what the end result is going to be. And if this was a wall hang and not a mug rug, I really don't see putting this up on the wall, but if I wanted to, I could have a little stick, a little dowel or something that would go in between the two little corner ones on the top, little corner tabs. I never know quite what to call them, but anyway, little triangles at the top. And you could hang it up just like that. And that would work really well too. So if you're looking for a way to finish off your quilts where you won't see any other fabric along the edge and your quilt just goes right to the edge, you want to try this facing technique. If you liked this video, and I hope you did, please hit the thumbs up below and be sure to share it with your quilting friends.